When it comes to MMA, not everyone can ride off into the sunset with a perfect record like one particular Dagestani. Most iconic fighters have been beaten at least once or twice throughout their career, some tasting more than their fair share of L's. But this doesn't always tell the full story, and despite how their records look on paper, the athletes mentioned in today's video were truly amongst the greatest to ever do it. So who are the best of this specific bunch and what makes them so great? I'm Noel and you're watching Fight Game Insider, and in no particular order today, we'll be discussing the top 10 best fighters with bad records. Number 10. Anthony Pettis. Not only is Showtime a former lightweight champion, but he also has two of the best victories ever witnessed in an MMA octagon. Benson Henderson and Stephen Thompson. If you're watching, you might want to look away now. At WEC 53, Pettis wowed fans by launching his Showtime kick off the side of the cage, catching Bendo flush on the chin. Although it did knock him out, it was enough to drop him and edge out the 5th round of a tightly contested fight, resulting in the WEC lightweight title. At UFC Fight Night in March 2019, Pettis would step up to 170 to take on Wonderboy, brutally knocking him out with a glorious Superman punch off the cage. A talented striker, Showtime is an anomaly. A multiple organization champion, he is the owner of a slightly questionable record of 25-14. However, many of the names in his L column are some of the greatest to ever do it, with the likes of RDA, Eddie Alvarez, Max Holloway, and Dustin Poirier either having worn gold or challenged for it during their careers. With his ever-game attitude, Pettis has proven time and again that he is the embodiment of the live by the sword, die by the sword mantra. Number 9. Andrei Arlovski. The Pitbull, as he is known by his loyal fans, is a fully paid-up member of heavyweight MMA royalty. However, you wouldn't have thought he'd make it to that status after a knockout loss in his very first outing. Arlovski, with a record of 34-23, has garnered a reputation as being one of the most fearsome heavyweights in history, scoring knockouts in half of his wins. He is also the winningest heavyweight in UFC history, and alongside a certain Donald Cerrone, more on him in a bit, is second in the all-time UFC win list. With his all-action heavy-hitting style, the Belarusian has beaten some serious dudes in the division during his almost quarter-century-long run in the game, including stalwarts such as Stefan Struve, Ben Rothwell, and Roy Nelson. That's not to mention former champs in the shape of BJJ expert Fabricio Verdum, plus Tim Sylvia and Frank Mir. But this being the heavyweight division, you can easily get caught, which Arlovski has been on plenty of occasions. He has shown, though, on more than one occasion, that although he is susceptible to going on a run of defeats, Arlovski has the mettle to come through the other side, being named the 2015 Comeback Fighter of the Year. Respect. Number 8. BJ Penn. Where do we start with our old pal BJ? A man so talented he made BJJ black belt just 3 years after his first class. The prodigy is one of the most natural guys ever to grace an octagon. At one point during his early to mid-career was taking out some of the heaviest hitters in the shape of Kaul Uno, Matt Serra, and Matt Hughes, the fight in which he incidentally won the welterweight title. BJ would go on to win the lightweight title against Joe Stevenson, cementing his legacy as an MMA GOAT, but some suggest he possibly kept the lights on a little too long. Towards the end of his career, a seriously slowed down version of Hawaii's own would lose fights to the likes of Dennis Seaver, Ryan Hall, and Clay Guida, who, no disrespect to those guys, wouldn't have stood a chance against BJ back in the day. Penn's record of 16-14 makes him look average when he is anything but. The vast majority of those losses came during his last 10 or so fights in the 2010s, when it's universally accepted that BJ did his best work in the 2000s. Number 7. Donald Cerrone. Anyone, anywhere, anytime. Cowboy was the dude who embodied that mantra more than any other mixed martial artist, and this is half the reason he holds a record of 36-17. Your favorite fighter's favorite fighter, the former pro kickboxer endeared himself to the masses with his exciting style, beating the who's who of legit killers down the years, including former and future champions such as Charles Oliveira and Eddie Alvarez. Much like BJ, Cowboy lost the vast majority of his bouts towards the end of his career, when a lot of people around the game had suggested he was over the hill. Anyone who saw the man fight, though, understands just what a pleasure it was to watch Cerrone, and in my humble opinion, MMA promotions everywhere could do with more guys just like him. Number 6. Mauricio Shogun Rua. The man with arguably the coolest nickname in all of sports has been around the game for what seems like an eternity. Still fighting as of late January of 2023, Rua has fought a laundry list of legends and has arguably only been beaten by world-class fighters. With a record of 27-14, he has won almost double the fights he's lost, and along the way, has picked up the Pride middleweight title as well as the UFC light heavyweight crown. Incidentally, he was dethroned by a young 22-year-old upstart by the name of John Jones. You might have heard of him. Along the way, Shogun has knocked out the vast majority of the opponents he holds W's against, including Lyoto Machida, Chuck Liddell, Alistair Overeem, and Rampage Jackson. Not a bad resume, is it? Of course, his longevity and style means he is susceptible to being caught, and caught he has been. But losing to the likes of Dan Henderson, Alexander Gustafsson, and Forrest Griffin is nothing to be ashamed of, so for that, we'll give him a pass. Number 5. Renan Barao. Anyone who thinks Renan Barao isn't an all-timer simply doesn't know the sport. The Brazilian once won 35 fights unbeaten at the beginning of his career, that after losing his debut. MMA ground to a halt in May 2014 as TJ Dillashaw shocked the planet with his TKO win over the Baron, which turned out to be the beginning of a sequence which would see the once dominant 135-pound champ lose 9 of his final 11 fights before calling it a career at 34-10. Barao is arguably the most prominent example of career falling off a proverbial cliff, but that doesn't make him a bad fighter. What he achieved in his early years via that mammoth unbeaten run deserves recognition, and Renan Barao's status as bona fide baller should follow him around like Dylan Dennis does Conor McGregor, for life. Number 4. Matt Brown. Ah, the immortal one. Brown's journey from heroin addict to his first MMA fight with zero training, then to the UFC is the stuff of legend, the likes of which we mere mortals couldn't even imagine. In just his 9th professional fight, the Ohio brawler knocked out future 3-time Bellator champ Douglas Lima, but his early to mid-career was littered with inconsistency. His best run came in the UFC, where he went on a 7-fight win streak between 2012 and 2014, but that came crashing down with a decision loss to Robbie Lawler in a welterweight title eliminator, and it's fair to say he never quite recovered. With 2/3 of his wins coming by way of knockout, there's no doubting Brown's talent, but since that Lawler fight, he has gone 5-7, which isn't really the form he would be hoping for in the autumn of his career. But something tells me men like Matt Brown don't particularly fight for the recognition, more the kill or be killed nature of the game. Number 3. Robbie Lawler. When Lawler retired earlier this year following his first round destruction of Nico Price, the UFC paid tribute to their former champ with a highlight reel video while he was standing in the octagon with Joe Rogan. Just for context, this never happens. That is the magnitude of Robbie Lawler, and as Rogan put it, a spectacular career. During the mid-2010s, he went 10-3 and beat some of the very best in the world. However, in the period directly after those peak years, he would go 2-5. This, I'm simply putting down to the mileage in the Lawler tank, and is not a true reflection on one of the best welterweight champions in living memory. Every time Lawler stepped into the octagon, he lived up to that ruthless nickname, smashing through men like Cowboy, Nick Diaz, Johnny Hendricks, and Rory McDonald in what was arguably the greatest fight the UFC has ever seen. His 30-16 record is deceiving as a lot of those losses came in his late 30s. The man is simply a legend. Number 2. Chael Sonnen. These days, not much happens in the world of MMA without Chael P having a say on it, which is basically how it's always been, in all fairness. Sonnen has that beautiful gift of being able to rub everybody up the wrong way, but he can also back it up. During a career spent bouncing around middleweight, light heavyweight, and even heavyweight, the BJJ black belt and DI wrestler has squared off against some of the very best and has often managed to hold his own. For someone who is never quite at the elite level, he has beaten some of the sport's biggest names including Rampage, Shogun, and former middleweight champ Michael Bisping. However, he has also lost to some questionable opponents such as longtime welterweight Damian Maia. Some of his other 17 losses are much more easily explained, as a quick look at his records will reveal names like Fedor Emelianenko, Anderson Silva, and many people's GOAT, John Jones. Sonnen's grappling is also unquestionable as he still holds the record for the most control time in UFC middleweight history. He hasn't fought for the promotion in 10 years, so yeah, a pretty big deal all things considered. Number 1. Randy Couture. What men like Randy did for the sport of MMA can never be questioned. These dudes stood up to public and even government scrutiny during the early days and came out the other side as pioneers of the sport. For that, they will never be forgotten. Couture fought in an era when little was known about the sport and you didn't have the technically proficient killers you see today. However, it was more like the Wild West back in those days, which is reflected in the great man's 19-11 record. Winning multiple UFC titles at both light heavyweight and heavyweight, Couture stood head and shoulders above his peers, but he didn't have his first pro fight until he was 34. If he was a young man today and had access to the latest training methods, there's no doubt he would do some serious damage in the heavyweight division, and probably even give John Jones a good run for his money. Couture is fondly remembered for his brawls with the like of Chuck Liddell and Vitor Belfort, but losing to guys of that caliber as well as Brock Lesnar and Lyoto Machida is absolutely nothing to be ashamed of, making that record a little more understandable. And that just about wraps it up for today's video. Were there any you think we missed? Let us know in the comments. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe and head kick the bell icon to never miss a new upload. I'm Noel, and until next time, see ya!